I'll start by saying that I'm a Texan by background. I see some hands going up back there. Born in Temple, Texas, raised the first 6 years of my life in Houston, Texas, until my parents divorced. My mom, and John alluded to this earlier, mom and dad separated and divorced when I was 6 years old. She had 3 kids. And I learned my first lesson in life, and that was education gives you options. She had a college degree from Prairie View A&M University and was an educator. And my dad had a 10th, 11th grade education. Had just come out of the Army, probably should have stayed in the Army. And as a consequence, she moved her 3 kids out to the Navajo Nation. Why the Navajo Nation? Because during that time, the 60s, they were asking educators to come out to the Navajo Nation to teach the boarding schools. So I grew up from the first 6 years of my life, or 7 years old to 15, out of the Navajo Nation. And what a godsend that was, because it took me out of the inner city of Houston, Texas, and put me in this place of Grand Canyons and painted deserts, and more importantly, the wonderful skies at night when the sun would go down, and I would look up the heavens and see those lights and wonder what it would be like to travel amongst the stars. That's sort of the beginning. And at the same time, 2 things, important aspects of. One was I'm a sci-fi buff, so I'm an original Star Trekkie, and so I looked at that, and that was sort of a roadmap for me. But more importantly, I got a chance to watch the evolving space program, first with the Mercury program, then the Gemini program, the Apollo program, which eventually led to the shuttle program, which I was a part of. And so it was a wonderful upbringing. It was a blessing to have that upbringing. And then when we moved back when I was 15 to Texas, and I had to decide on what field I was going to major in. In 1969, looking at Neil and Buzz land on the moon, I was saying, I'm going to do what those guys are doing. But I also say with this audience that when I was looking at that in the 60s, I didn't see anybody look like me, right? So for me to decide that I wanted to travel in space was somewhat of a leap of faith, and I took that leap. So in high school, I had to decide on what field I was going to go into that will eventually lead me to the astronaut program, and I chose medicine. And I chose medicine in part because of a guy by the name of Joe Kerwin, who was the first physician, American physician, to travel in space. And I went, I could be a doctor, and I could travel in space. In May, I was inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame. Well, one of the activities, I had an opportunity to be on stage with Joe Kerwin, who was in his 90s, and he had done spacewalk, and I'm getting goosebumps now just thinking about that. And it was wonderful being with him and reminding him, because I had told him in the past that he was my inspiration, and so that was my inspiration. So I'll stop there, and I'm going to let Victor talk about his, and then I want to talk about the shuttle and the difference between the shuttle and what he flew. Yeah.
I can't wait to hear about the shuttle, but in due time. So thank you, first and foremost. Thank you to Valerie and to Bernard. This is unreal. This is unreal to sit here and be able to share this story with you, especially sitting next to you and hearing some of those things that I've heard before and some of it that is new. I was born in Pomona, California, Southern California, on the eastern edge of Los Angeles County. And my mother and father were never married. I was born out of wedlock, and I grew up in the hood. A lot of my friends would, choose paths that didn't lead them where they wanted to go, not one that, provided opportunities. But the difference, I think, what allowed me to at least have a chance at turning that into motivation and choosing education to open up some of those doors is that even though my parents didn't live together, I still had my mother and my father. They both decided that their investment in me was even more important than their relationship. And so I had both of their influences in my life. And that made all the difference in the world. And so I grew up in a family that around the holidays, we would go to a convalescent home or a boys and girls home, and we would bring gifts and sing songs. And so for me, the holidays weren't when I would get something, it was when we gave something. And I very much wanted that to be a part of my family and my children Even as a kid, I'm like, I want my family to be like that. So service was core to our family. Even though we didn't have much, it wasn't about having lots of things. The gift that we gave the most to especially when we went to the convalescent homes, nursing homes, older families, we would choose the families or the residents that didn't have families. And when we would show up, I will never forget how it felt to be a young person walking into that. Youth changes things, doesn't it? I mean, as I stare at 50 coming on, I'm like, man, you guys don't realize how good you have it, how magic just where you are in life is. And those kids would walk in, and the bags of gifts and the fruit and the socks and the soft, pants paled in comparison to those kids showing up and singing songs. And so that was just an indelible part of my upbringing, service. I also had this other outlet, being in Pomona. I was surrounded by things that could have, become my reality for the rest of my life. But instead, sports was an escape. I played every sport. If I could try it, I didn't get introduced to golf or rugby. I kind of wish that they had those in Pomona. Otherwise, I think rugby and golf would both be my sports today. I wrestled and I played football, which is like if you mix them, that's rugby. And so, but I played football and I wrestled, and those provided an opportunity for me as well. I went to college on a wrestling scholarship and tried out for the football team, and between that and engineering, I figured I don't have time to get in trouble, and so those things kept me, again, moving in a direction that opened the doors for opportunity. So service and sports. And then I was at Cal Poly studying engineering and, playing sports and this idea of, doing something technical. I didn't have this desire to be an astronaut then. That was just, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. So I was like, let's just graduate first. That was my goal. And before that, it was get in. When you don't have parents who have gone through that process, it can be a daunting thing to think about going to university. And so graduating college, I joined the Navy, and I had this opportunity to fly. And I cannot tell you how, it was a very nerve-wracking decision, committing at 22 years old to commit to 8 years. I'm like, I'm gonna be 30 before I can even choose to do something else. That's huge. Like, is Kyle in the house? Kyle, when I met him, the first thing he told me was he's going into a 7-year physical training. I'm like, you're 18. That's half your life experience. That blows my mind because I remember being 22 and committing to 8 years of a journey, but for a career. But I took that chance. I stepped out in faith, and I haven't worked a day in my life. And so, but my journey to the astronaut corps, seeing shuttles launch on TV and hearing about what you all were doing was amazing. The Space Shuttle definitely was there. I didn't know what it took to become one of those people until later in my career. I was in test pilot school, and I was at a test pilot convention, and Pam Melroy, one of the few female shuttle commanders we've had, the second after Eileen Collins, came and gave a talk about her mission. And I decided then, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna apply, and they can tell me no, and they did the first time. Then I went to graduate school and got a little more formal education, and I was graduated from test pilot school by this time. And I got a call while working on Capitol Hill asking if I wanted to move to Houston, and this part of this journey began. And so, and I want to say, I have looked up to Bernard and so many of others. Like, he mentioned that he didn't have someone who looked like him, but because of his stepping out in faith, I had him and Stephanie and Guy and Charlie to look up to. And when I got into the office, my supervisor at the time recommended, I was telling him some things about, just, hey, here's some unique challenges that I deal with, and just want your perspective. Pat Forrester is a great guy. And he said, hey, do you know Bernard Harris? I would love to introduce you. And that's how we met. And that changed my life. Knowing Bernard made me a better astronaut, has made me a better astronaut. And so to be here and to, like I said, I am, it's amazing to sit here in this place and be able to share some of these stories. But I am really grateful that I did have folks that looked like me, and hopefully we're continuing to give folks, we tell people all the time, dream big, but I love the fact that, like, you can now dream in color. You can dream in living color, because we should be trying to represent the country that has supported us.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, geez. I'm gonna clap for you. So what I thought is share with you what it's like to go up on the shuttle. Most of you in this room know about the shuttle. Maybe not. Oh, he's looking too. So the shuttle actually started being developed in the early 70s, and it wasn't into the 80s that we started flying it. It's a remarkable vehicle. You've seen the photos and probably videos many times before, but you may not know that it weighs 5 million pounds. In order to get that 5 million pounds in the air, requires that we light 5 engines, 3 on the spaceship itself. And the way, let me back up and say that the way that the shuttle was configured, it was a reusable rocket. So it had the spaceship itself connected to the external tank, and then connected to the external tank, that big orange thing, were solid rocket motors. And the idea here is that orange tank contained the fuel for the main engines. So there were pass-throughs so the cryogenic hydrogen and oxygen would go into the engines of the spaceship itself and produce 1.5 million pounds of thrust just from the spaceship itself. The solid rocket motors, which carried most of the weight of the fuel, the weight of the spaceship itself, they each kicked out 3 million pounds of thrust. So a total of 7.5 million pounds of thrust. At T-minus 5 seconds, we light the main engines to make sure that those engines are running, up to 102%, not 100%. NASA does things differently, 102%. And once those get cleared, then we light the solid rocket motors. Once you light the solid rocket motors, there's no turning back, because it's just going to burn until it runs out. And so immediately when those fire, you get about 1.5 G of force as you get pushed back from your seat, and then it will climb up to about 2 Gs or so, and then back down, going through what we call the maximum dynamic pressure, and that is the outside of the atmosphere itself causes pressure on the vehicle, and we actually have to slow down in order to get through that. But once we get above the atmosphere, then we can just continue to accelerate. It comes in 2 stages. The first stage takes us to 100,000 feet in less than 2 minutes, and then another 6.5 minutes to orbit for a total of 8.5 minutes. And then that second stage is where you start accelerating from that 1.5 to 2 to 3.5, and then we actually throttle the engines back to hold us at 3.5. In part because of what I mentioned, the dynamic pressure, but the other is that we're taking a G load over 8.5 minutes. It's not like when he flies jets, he pulls 8, 9, 10 and stuff like that, but for seconds at a time. So that gets. But the nice thing, or the memorable thing for me on my first mission is we got to 8.5 minutes and the engines cut off, and it felt like I was stepping on glass. It got extremely quiet. By the way, it's extremely noisy, you can imagine. And very rough ride. And when those engines cut off, it was like you slipped on glass and you were just skating, and it got really quiet. It's beautiful. And how I knew I was in space is because everything around me began to rise up slowly in front of you, and you go, wow, this is cool. I'm really in space.
It really works.
It does work. I made it. And so at any rate, I had the opportunity to do that twice on board Columbia and Discovery.
Awesome. So I'm training for a mission now, and I'll tell you a little bit about that if that's okay later. I'll start with the spacecraft that I flew. And so very similarly, it's it's 8 minutes and 49 seconds. And I think that is something that most people are lost on. If you haven't watched a launch, even if you have, you don't see the whole thing. We go from sitting on the ground at sea level, we're right at the coast in Florida, and I launched from Florida as well, Kennedy Space Center. In fact, our launch pad was a former Space Shuttle launch pad. We have 39A to the south and 39B to the north, and I was on the southern one which SpaceX has leased from NASA. And I was on top of a Falcon 9 rocket. And the spacecraft is the Crew-Dragon, the SpaceX Crew-Dragon. And so this is our vehicle that can get us to the International Space Station. And so from launch to, I'm in orbit now. I'm not at the orbit I need to be at to get to the space station, but I'm in space safely. It's 8 minutes, 49 seconds, at least for that day, November 16th, 2020. And let's see, a lot of the same things, throttling the engines, we weren't 3.5, we were 3.3 Gs, throttling the engines, going through maximum dynamic pressure or max Q, all of the same throttle downs, throttle up. And it was amazing, amazing to feel all of those things. This is my first flight in space, and I'm the pilot. And so it was an interesting experience. I won't say an out-of-body experience. It was like a two-body experience. One of me was fully immersed in good altitude speed. I'm ready in case something goes wrong. And the other person was just like, wow, this. We throttled down, for example, and I mean, it was like somebody hit the brakes. I'm like, oh, we slowed down. Yeah, I don't need to look at the display. I know it happened. And then they go, all right, we're through dynamic pressure, throttle up. And it's automated, and the vehicle goes full power. And it was like, and I'm back in my seat, and I'm like, I know it happened. And similarly, we staged, the first part of the rocket runs out of fuel, and if you've seen these Falcons, they're pretty amazing. Back then, we had to use all of the energy to get us to an International Space Station trajectory, so we didn't allow it to, we didn't have enough fuel for it to turn around and fly back to land, but it would flip over and land on a barge out in the ocean, in an automated autonomous barge. So pretty amazing. Our rocket landed on a barge, and they reused it and flew it a bunch more times. And then the upper stage lights. And so the Falcon 9 has 9 engines, and the upper stage has the second stage, they call it. The second stage has 1 engine. And so it has to light. It's kind of important. And I remember staring at it. It lights in about 11 seconds, either 12 seconds. I remember feeling like it has been a half an hour. What is taking so long? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it lights, and it starts off at about 3/4 of a G. So you go from this high G pushing you back in your seat to now I'm less than 1 G. So I weigh 200 pounds. I'm like 150 pounds right now. And then it slowly gets me back to 1 G, and then it accelerates for the next almost 6 minutes. And at the end of it, I'm doing 3.3 Gs. I weigh almost 1,000 pounds, me plus the spacesuit, 3 times the when we say Gs, it's times the force of gravity. So when I'm pulling that 3.3 Gs, I am 3 times what I normally weigh. And then it's Space Shuttle called it MECO, main engine cutoff. With the Falcon, we call it SECO, second stage engine cutoff. And at 8 minutes and 49 seconds, the engine's cut off, and I go from 1,000 pounds to 0. And the most amazing thing for me was, I don't know why I hadn't thought this was going to happen, but all of those things also around us floating, we had a little Baby Yoda doll. You remember? Grogu is his name, but Baby Yoda, that was our 0 G indicator. That was cool. But the thing that surprised me the most is I looked down and I'm like, man, whose arms are those right there by me? They were mine. My arms just were floating, but I didn't put them here. They were down here on the seat, and then all of a sudden they were here without me doing anything, but because I'm weightless. And I'm strapped into my seat so tightly that I other than my arms, I couldn't tell. I didn't feel it at the moment. It was quite amazing. So, something really exciting is early next year, in the spring of next year, we're going to go to the moon. And we're going to fly on top of the Space Launch System rocket. The Space Launch System rocket is a modification of a lot of this shuttle hardware, so that orange fuel tank that Bernard was talking about, we're using those. We've repurposed them and turned it into the core stage of the rocket. So those 3 engines that were on the back of the orbiter, the shuttle orbiter, we took 3 of them plus 1 and stuck them on the bottom of that fuel tank. And so now that orange piece is not just the fuel tank, it's the rocket. And there's 4 of those engines. So instead of 1.5 million pounds of thrust, 2 million pounds of thrust. 4 of those same engines. Most of the parts are the same. It's got new computers, new software, and it's got additive manufacturing, or what we call 3D printing, but like with metal, Inconel steel. That's pretty amazing manufacturing tech. And that is the core stage, which will ride with us the whole 9 minutes to space. And then we've got solid rocket boosters. 6 seconds prior to T0, the main engines light, and they start burning the liquids, the oxygen and hydrogen. But then the solids light, and the same thing. When they light, something is going somewhere. Even if you didn't want it to, it's now going. and it's going to go for 2 minutes and 19 seconds, whether you like it or not. And they decided when the shuttle flew, there were 4 segments. If you remember the Estes model rockets, you know, you have that little solid propellant rocket. Well, it's like taking 4 of those and stacking them up and then putting a nose cone and a nozzle on the back. Ours have 5 segments, 5 of those now. So they're a little more powerful. So each one puts out about 3.5 million pounds of thrust. So all total, we're pushing almost 9 million pounds of thrust at sea level at liftoff. So when they light those engines, 8.8 million pounds of thrust, if you want to do the math. 8.8 million pounds of thrust, and the vehicle still weighs about 5.5 million pounds. So we have a lot of oomph coming off the pad. It's going to leap off the pad, and then when it ends, we will shut off the engine. Something else very unique, and I'll stop here. This is a little long. So when we at 8 minutes and 30 seconds, it depends on the winds and other things that day. When we shut off the engines, we'll be in an orbit that a human has never been in right off the bat, and then we'll go to several other orbits. I'll talk about the trajectory if it comes up. But the space station orbits at 400 kilometers or 250 miles above the Earth. When I launched in my Falcon, in my Dragon, we went to 200 kilometers and then slowly worked our way up to 400. We're going to launch, and at the engine cutoff, we'll be in a 1,200 mile by 100 mile orbit. And the reason is, if we get up there, this is the first time humans have flown this spacecraft. It's called Orion. And if we get up there and find something's a problem, we don't have to do anything. That 100 miles will actually bring us into the atmosphere, and then the drag of the atmosphere will slow us down, and we will come back to Earth. If things are looking good, when we get far away from Earth, we'll burn the engines and we'll raise that 100 miles up to be above the atmosphere so that we can go around again. And then we'll go out to 40,000 miles. And on that first day, about an hour and a half into the flight, we'll be on our way to a trajectory where we're going to see the Earth, and it'll be about that big. We'll be 40,000 miles. And that only time humans have been there is passing through it on the way to the moon. But we'll actually orbit the Earth for 23.5 hours. And then, if everything is looking good, we've checked out the life support system, the crew is feeling good, the ground team is good, they'll give us a go for TLI, which we haven't said on the radio in seriousness since the 70s. We said it to the shuttle once in jest, but they'll give us a go for translunar injection. And then we'll burn the engines on our spacecraft, on our Orion spacecraft, for 5.5 minutes. And instead of going 17,500 miles an hour, I've heard a bunch of folks know that speed. That's how fast the space station is going around the Earth. We'll get up to about 25,000 miles per hour as we head to the moon. And we'll be back to Earth in about 8 days.
Yeah, great.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty neat. Pretty neat. I wish I was going. Maybe not.